Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ConnectALL Product Demonstration webinar. My name is Soumya Menon. I head Marketing Communications at ConnectALL, and I'll be your moderator for today. I'm pleased to introduce you to Joe Schultz, AVP Emerging Technologies at ConnectALL. Today, he will show you how integrating VersionOne and Azure DevOps will help your development teams increase productivity. So before we begin, I'll run through some housekeeping points. Firstly, today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session, so we will send you the link later. Next, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. So if you have any questions during the session, please type them into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel, and we will bring them up after the presentation. And lastly, we'd like to encourage you to share today's webinar with your teams, social networks, and communities. So without further ado, I'm handing it over now to Joe.
All right. Well, thank you, Soumya, and welcome, everybody. My name is Joe Schultz. I'm the AVP for Emerging Technologies here at ConnectALL. And my background is primarily around development. So what I'm going to talk about today is development, how to accelerate specifically an Agile development process. And what I found in my experience is the biggest problem in Agile development is simply communication, not a technical issue at all. It's communicating between the various teams using various sets of tools. And in the Agile world, it seems like that problem, which has always been a problem, has gotten even more pronounced because of the proliferation of tools, lots of open source environments that people like to use. So today what we're going to talk about then is how to solve that problem. Now specifically, I'm going to talk for a few minutes about the what we call the connected tool chain, kind of the problem that ConnectALL is trying to solve. And then I'll spend a couple of minutes talking about the ConnectALL platform itself and how it addresses that problem, the benefits that you can derive from a ConnectALL implementation. And then finally, I'm going to actually show you a demonstration. So we'll jump right into a live product and show you ConnectALL working so you can get an idea of how this works. Now, what I'm going to demonstrate, of course, is the ConnectALL administration. Because if you think about it, an integration tool is primarily a background kind of tool. So I'll show you how it works, but it's really a set it and forget it kind of technology. So largely ConnectALL is behind the scenes and invisible and just making all this stuff happen. And then finally, at the very end, we'll open it up for questions and answers. So as Soumya mentioned, if you have questions as we're going along, feel free to type them in the chat window, and then Soumya will moderate those questions at the end. Thanks. Okay, so when we talk about a connected tool chain, it's all about moving work from place to place. So what do I mean by that? Well, today, work exists in a lot of different places. You have lots of tools in a production environment these days. In any kind of corporate environment, you might have tools on the front end for managing, let's say, your support process or your customer relationship management process. Tools like, for example, ServiceNow and Salesforce. Could be any of a dozen different tools in each category. And those kinds of tools are designed to capture information directly from your end users. So when people are using your software, they're logging their problems and their requests and their enhancements and their suggestions, things like that, into these kinds of tools. And we want those to drive then the development process. So we need to get those somehow into the hands of the coders. Usually that flows through some sort of backlog management tool. The one we're going to talk about today is ConnectALL's VersionOne, for example. But again, there's a dozen different tools in this space, tools like Jira, et cetera. And so we want to take those customer requests, put them into a backlog management tool, into a planning tool where you identify how you're going to attack those problems, the kinds of use cases you're going to solve, the stories that are being designed, and the release and sprint boundaries that you want to try and develop. And we want to get those plans then into the hands of the developers themselves, into the development team. And so, for example, today I'll show you an example with Azure DevOps. So one of, again, many tools in the development space. And I want to be able to flow that information from the planning tool into development, and then ideally into the hands of the QA team who's doing testing, whether that's the same folks or a separate center of excellence for testing, using some sort of tool like Microfocus, for example. And again, the tool names in this diagram don't really matter. What matters is the flow of information. We're trying to move data across all of these to keep all of the people in the process involved, engaged, and up to date in information. So what we're trying to do is build these pipelines, if you will, between the various disciplines. We want to bring CRM data in as, say, feature requests into the management tool. We want to bring service now, incident escalations into this management tool, et cetera. And you can see the other ones. We want to integrate with code. So today, what I'm going to show you is an example of, for example, backlog management to code level integration with Azure DevOps. But all of these pieces of the connected tool chain need the same kind of functionality or the same kind of integration in order to keep people involved. So I just use the word integration. Integration means a lot of things to a lot of people. At ConnectALL, what we think integration is moving data and putting it in the hands of the people that need it. So the way ConnectALL works, if you look at this chart, ConnectALL Integration Platform, is that ConnectALL becomes your central hub of data movement. We move the signaling information or the control information from place to place so that the right person has the right information. So in our picture a minute ago, right, we were talking about a Salesforce feature request coming into CollabNet, and then we want the VersionOne story, let's say, to go to Azure DevOps. So those would be integration links on this chain. I would have information coming in from Salesforce to ConnectALL, which ConnectALL would recognize it and then move it into VersionOne. And then from VersionOne, it would move it into Azure DevOps. And as changes are made in any of those tools, ConnectALL would be the one that would be moving those changes back and forth to keep everybody up to date. Now, does that mean that you synchronize every piece of information across every tool? No, not necessarily. You want to synchronize only what's important, right? The Salesforce users don't need to know the details about the code modules necessarily. They just want to know when the story is complete and when it's ready to implement, what patch was released, that kind of stuff. So we would only move the appropriate information at each level to keep everybody in the chain informed. But most importantly, what we want to do then is keep everyone in the tool they like to use. So developers then can stay in Azure DevOps and do their normal job, but the people in Salesforce can see the results of the Azure DevOps work without having to jump back and forth between tools or have meetings or send spreadsheets back and forth, all of those kind of communication things that we normally would have to do. And this is a list, just a partial list, in fact, of all the ConnectALL integrations. These are named integrations that we've implemented and have documented on our website. Most of these are polling integrations where ConnectALL talks directly to the tool through their published API. A few of them are push integrations where the tool talks into ConnectALL through a published API. And of course, there's an unlimited number of possibilities beyond just this list. We do have custom adapters that can be used to talk to any application API or database, for example. So we can literally talk to anything that you have an electronic connection to. So the whole point is ConnectALL is connecting all of the pieces, hence ConnectALL, all of the pieces of your DevOps chain from inception, from idea inception, all the way through delivery. Okay? So that's what ConnectALL is. It's automating this tool chain. So what I'm going to show you today is a very simple example. The idea is that, let's say I'm the VersionOne sprint manager, and I'm going to go through and identify what I want done. So I have some great idea, and I want to log that into VersionOne as a story that may have come from some customer relationship management tool, or maybe some idea that I had based on industry research. But I'm going to create that as a VersionOne story. And then what I want to do is get that in the hands of the developers. So instead of having to have a stand-up sprint meeting and me tell them or me show them or me send them emails, what I want is I want that idea to show up directly in their development tool. And so I'm going to use ConnectALL to synchronize that directly into Azure DevOps. So ConnectALL is the link between those two. And now I, as a sprint manager, can stay in version 1. The developers, as coders, can stay in their development environment, Azure DevOps, and we can have an online communication discussion about this idea without either one of us ever having to leave our respective environments. So that's what ConnectALL does. As I said, it's largely behind the scenes. So ConnectALL just runs in the background. But what I'll show you is how you set that up and how you turn it on so that that synchronization can then happen. Okay, so that's what I'm going to show you. So let's jump right in. I'm going to show you, as I said, version 1 to Azure DevOps. Again, this scenario could be applied to any combination of tools that we support in your development environment. So let me get out of PowerPoint here, and I'm going to jump right into ConnectALL. So ConnectALL runs as a web service in the background. So when you install ConnectALL, we install a web portal, and you access that through a simple URL. In this case, I've got ConnectALL, as you can see, running on my local host. So ConnectALL is installed on my machine here, but I'm still connecting to it through a web browser. I don't act as a consumer, as a user or administrator of ConnectALL. I don't have to have any software on my machine other than a browser. I connect into that browser through the URL, and I get the ConnectALL homepage. To set up a new integration then, all I do is pick from the list of supported integrations. So if I was going to set up a brand new version 1 to VSTS integration, for example, I would literally just find those in my list of tools. You see the big long list here. I'll pick version 1 on one side. I'll pick Azure DevOps on the other side. And now I can create some new link. This is what we call an application link, an application link. So you see on the right-hand side, I've got a whole bunch of them already defined. And the one that I'm going to look at today is this version 1 story to Azure DevOps story. The whole purpose of this integration is to move story objects from version 1 into DevOps or back and forth. All of our links are inherently bidirectional. So I can create things in version 1 and have them show up in Azure DevOps, or I can create things in Azure DevOps and have them show in version 1. You can also control that. So I can control that workflow and decide which way I want that to flow. You can also put parameters on it, filters, if you will, on each end so that only certain objects will show up and be synchronized across. So that's creating an application link. Once this application link is running in the background, then it just moves the data from one environment to another. So for example, I'm going to go into version 1 now, and I'm going to create a new object. So I'm just going to create a new backlog item in version 1. So this will be Joe's great idea. So I'm just going to type this in as a new story object or a backlog item in version 1. It'll be Joe's great idea. And I'll just say, let's change the world. So I've got some revolutionary new software idea that I want implemented as a story. I could obviously assign it sprints and backlog. I mean, I could do anything that version 1 would normally do. I use version 1's interface to do this, and I hit save. This now becomes a new object inside of the version 1 environment. You'll see that it's going to show up here as, there we go, backlog item 03080. So that's what version 1 knows it by. And what we'll do is get that synchronized across. And once it's synchronized, you'll see, for example, these two existing ones were already synchronized, and it's brought in information from our ALM tool or our development tool. These happen to be IDs that came in from Azure DevOps. So once ConnectALL synchronizes across those two, I'll establish a relationship between them, and I can flow information in both directions. So my new Joe's great idea will show up in ADO, but any changes the developers make will also come back into version 1. That's all done through this, this link that I talked about called the version 1 story to Azure DevOps story. That's just the name that I gave it. And you see the way that it works is it's a very simple 3-level wizard. So I have to first tell ConnectALL where the servers are located. That's what we call the configuration. So I'm just literally connecting to a URL. Then I identify the objects that I want synchronized. And so that's what we call the entity mapping. So in this case, I picked story in version 1 to user story in Azure DevOps. And then finally, you map the fields within those objects. All of these dialogues you're seeing are dynamic, meaning that as I select a server, for example, we will then populate the object window with all of the available objects in that server. So it's a dynamic list that we're reading at runtime. In this way, of course, we can support any object that your server supports. So this can include customizations. It can also include plugins. If there are new object types because of some integration you've installed into version 1 or ADO, for example, you'll see these show up in the list dynamically. So in my case, I'm picking out of the box objects called story and user story over on the ADO side. You can also use this object mapping screen, by the way, to manage your workflow. So there's a bunch of advanced properties. I'm not going to go through all of these today, but the point is there's a couple of important ones. One of the first ones is the sync operation property. This controls the direction of the flow. So right now I've got it set up so that changes on version 1 will automatically sync to ADO, and the ADO changes will also sync back to version 1. I've got create and update in both directions. That's the default. But if I wanted to control this a little more granularly, maybe I wanted to say that new stories have to start in the planning tool, version 1 in this example, and I don't want decompose stories to show back up. I want the developers to be able to decompose those stories into more granular components for themselves, but the planning team doesn't need to see that detail. So in that case, I could, for example, turn off create in version 1. And so now new objects in version 1 will create counterparts in Visual Studio, ADO, but things that the developers create won't automatically go back into version 1. So you can control that kind of flow to and from. That's true for both create and update. You can also control which objects go back and forth, and that's what we call the poll query. So for example, maybe as a planning manager, I create a new idea, but until I flesh it out and until I get approval from the rest of the team, I don't want it to actually show up in the developer queue because I don't want the developers to start working on something that may actually never be approved. So I could put a filter on here. I could say, for example, that only if the field approved equals true or whatever the condition might be in version 1, those are the only stories then that will migrate across into the development environment. So I'm putting what we call a poll query to filter which objects flow back and forth between the tools. So this is essentially your workflow. You can have a multi-level workflow on both sides, and we can match different conditions to only move data back and forth when you believe it's appropriate. So there's a lot of ways to mix and match this. The whole point is that we can support any custom workflow as well as the custom objects and attributes like I mentioned. So once you've decided what you want to synchronize then, the entities themselves, then you can identify the detailed properties for that through this field mapping. Once again, this list of fields on the left and right are dynamically populated by the previous responses. So once you've given us a server and an object, we go get all the fields for that object within that server. And then all you do is literally mix and match the fields to each other. So you can say things like, oh, I want to assign, for example, this asset state to the acceptance criteria, which of course makes no sense. But I can assign literally any field to any field, and then you identify the direction of the flow. So most fields are going to be bidirectional, meaning that they'll flow both ways. But sometimes control information will even only go up or down in the flow. So you identify the flow direction simply with this check. And then all you have to do is hit the plus sign and now it becomes a monitored field. That now will get added to the synchronization list. And this is something that ConnectALL will monitor automatically on both sides. If necessary, like in this case, we'll also do all of the data type conversion. And so you can see, for example, the details here. I'm going to be moving this HTML to a state list. And we will do those kinds of data conversions automatically. You can also control that if you need to by overriding our default data type conversion method. You can also identify values within a field. So priority is a good example. Priority has a whole bunch of different values on both sides. And if I click on it to look at them, you can see that, in Visual version 1, priorities are high, medium, and low, whereas in Visual Studio, ADO, they're stored as 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I have to just provide the map here graphically to show ConnectALL how to move these back and forth. So, 1 goes to high, 4 goes to low, and then both 2 and 3 go to medium in this case. And so ConnectALL will take care of all the conversion of the data types. It'll match the values across, and it'll refer to the rules that you've specified in this window on how to do that. You can even get fancy with some if then else logic and this advanced value mapping. You can set defaults as well. And you can even throw code in here if you need to. So if you have some really strange event where you have to write some logic where, if it's Tuesday and it's raining and it's Joe's, requirement, then I want to do something different. I want to set the value to low priority instead of high priority. And so if you need to do really complicated if then else logic, you can throw code in here. But that's generally only a minority of the time. 2%, 3% of the time that you would ever have to resort to code. 98% of the time you can use ConnectALL's window to just graphically drag and drop things across. So that's all there is to defining it. To define a new link, assuming that we have connectivity to the servers, takes a matter of 10 or 15 minutes, assuming that you know what fields you want to link, which ones you want to put in the monitor. And that's really all there is to it. And then it just runs in the background. We get a dashboard, for example, where we can see activity. You notice in my case, I think I have a permission error here. And so I'm getting some failures. But there's a new record created. This is the one that we just did here in this demo. So I created a new object in version 1, and it got synchronized across into Visual Studio, into ADO. And so now if I go into ADO, I should be able to refresh the window, and I'll see Joe's great idea in the developer's queue. So this runs, our polling query runs every 30 seconds, every 60 seconds by default. And so within, 30 to 60 seconds generally, you have the updates flowing both directions. In this case, I've made it all bidirectional. So if I click on this Joe's great idea and I do something in ADO, these will flow back into version 1 as well. So I could do things like, add an attachment. Maybe I build a screenshot inside of my prototyping tool in ADO, and I want to send that back to the planning manager and say, hey, is this acceptable? This might even flow all the way back to a CRM system for the user to take a look at and approve or not approve based upon what they needed to accomplish. I could also do things like add comments. I could change statuses. I could advance the workflow. Literally, I can do anything that I would normally do in DevOps. I could even associate this object to other objects. And if I wanted to with other workflow links in ConnectALL, I could have those subordinate objects flow back. So maybe, for example, I want the developer to break this user story down into tasks. I can do that right here inside of Azure DevOps, and I could have those tasks then flow back into version 1, and ConnectALL would then manage the statuses on both sides as well. The whole point is the developers can stay in Azure DevOps, the planning managers can stay in version 1, and we can cooperatively communicate back and forth between the environments. And that's really all there is to ConnectALL. It's a, as I said, kind of a set it and forget it technology. It takes minutes to set up a new connection just with point and click, picking through the lists. And then once it's running, it just monitors in the background and keeps these connections flowing back and forth, keeping the two sides of the equation in sync. So if I go back to my connected tool chain idea here, this is what we just talked about, is my idea flowing from version 1 to DevOps. But as I said, of course, any of these connected tool chain links could be automated, and they could be automated in any fashion that works in your environment. Okay, and with that, Soumya, I think I'm going to open it up to questions. Are there any questions from the audience?
We definitely do have some interesting questions, but before that, I should say that this was a great demonstration, so thank you so much. We'll head to the first one, which is we have a very customized workflow process. Can ConnectALL work with custom object types and attributes?
Oh, that's a very good question, and the answer is absolutely. So, every customer I talk to says, well, we're a little bit different because we do this or that or the other thing. Every organization has tweaked their workflow to support their particular organization. And that's as it should be. I mean, you should customize things to be most efficient for your own environment. And so that's the way ConnectALL works. Rather than enforcing a model, throwing a model at you that you have to then change your organization to comply to, we adapt to whatever yours is. So we can support any custom object, we can support any custom attribute. As I showed you, we can even support custom workflow rules.
Okay. How can I limit which items get synced between the two tools?
Okay, well, that's kind of related to the previous question in that it's dealing with custom workflow. And if you remember on the entity configuration screen, I showed what we call a poll query. And the poll query is where you identify parameters or limits. So I might be able to say, I think the example I showed you a minute ago was setting something like approved equal true, essentially creating a filter so that only approved stories would actually flow into the other side. And so you can use those poll queries then to define any workflow condition on either side of the equation. So again, with the previous question, that goes with the custom workflow and attributes as well. So all of that lets you adapt ConnectALL to however you like to use those tools best.
Okay. I think this last question is something that you've covered, but I'll still go ahead and ask you. What are the system requirements for ConnectALL, and can it run in a virtual environment?
ConnectALL actually, it's doing a lot of work. People often think, oh, I've got to have this big beefy server to do integrations, and a lot of tools do require that, but ConnectALL doesn't. We actually work on very small Delta packages, and so it's a very efficient format. And what that lets us do is just move only the changes back and forth. So ConnectALL runs on a very small image. It doesn't generally, recommended minimums are like 4 gig of memory, which nowadays even phones have more memory than that, much less servers. And it can run on virtually any kind of CPU configuration as well. So it's a very small image, kind of, I usually liken it to the AWS small environments, for example. And with that, we can synchronize hundreds of transactions a minute. So, you can grow as you need to, but it doesn't take much to run ConnectALL. And it definitely can be virtualized as well. So ConnectALL can run on-premise, on physical hardware. It can run in your local cloud, or it could run even in our cloud. We have a hosting service where we can run it. So ConnectALL can essentially run anywhere as long as it has an electronic line of sight to the systems that you want it to talk to. Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. That's all the time we have for this session. Thank you, everyone, for attending this session. If you have more questions, do get in touch with us. And do check our website for more interesting webinars. And if it does interest you, register to book your slot. And I hope that we'll all see you again. Thank you so much.